Hello, everyone. My name is Will Guthrie, and I'm the chief of the NIST Statistical Engineering Division. A little hard to get that out. And I'm very pleased and honored to welcome you all today to the third webinar, I believe, or at least a subsequent one after a couple that were last week. I think Wednesday's was canceled this week and is going to be replayed to the I guess this is actually the fourth then. So this will be really the third, was the fourth, Fall Technical Conference 2021 webinar series. So before we get going, I'd like to remind you, please silence your microphones to minimize background noise. And if you have a question, please use the raise hand feature or the Q&A box. And if I could have the next slide, please, that would be good. So I'll tell you a little bit about the Fall Technical Conference before we get started. It's an annual conference sponsored by the organizations you see there, two of the divisions from American Society for Quality and two of the sections from the American Statistical Association. And the conference goal is really to engage researchers and practitioners in a dialogue that will lead to a more effective use of statistics for quality and innovation. And if you want to know more, you can see the URL there on the screen that will take you to more information. Next slide, please. And I also want to ask people to save the date and remember that the Fall Technical Conference will be back, hopefully in person, from the 11th to the 15th of October in 2022 in Park City, Utah. And the theme is going to be mining for quality with statistics and data science. And next slide, please. Here is the series of Fall Technical Conference webinars that is scheduled. And as I mentioned, I think the third one had to be canceled, but will be replayed. And we're now on the fourth one. So it's going to be my pleasure to introduce Dr. Wendy Martinez. And if I could have the next slide, please. So Dr. Martinez is the director of the Mathematical and Statistics Research Center at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and is a coordinating editor of the Journal of Statistics Surveys. In 2018, she was elected president of the American Statistical Association for the 2020 term. With Angel R. Martinez, she is the author of two books on MATLAB-based computational statistics and exploratory data analysis, Computational Statistics Handbook with MATLAB and Exploratory Data Analysis with MATLAB. She earned a bachelor's degree from Cameron University with a double major in mathematics and physics. Then she earned a master's degree in aerospace engineering at George Washington University and the NASA Langley Research Center in '91, and a PhD in computational sciences and informatics, specializing in computational statistics from George Mason University. She's been a program officer at the Office of Naval Research and has also held adjunct faculty positions at Strayer University and George Mason. Dr. Martinez was elected as a fellow of the American Statistical Association in 2006 and as a member of the International Statistical Institute in 2007. In 2017, she won the Founders Award of the American Statistical Association for her outstanding leadership and support of statistical and multidisciplinary research throughout the profession, including, among many other things, work in support of statistical education and opportunities for minorities and women. So I'm very excited to introduce her for this talk, the FTC plenary address, where she's going to be talking to us about data ethics. And I think this is an area I need to learn more about. We're doing more and more work at NIST where we focused in the past on physical sciences and didn't have data about people, to biological projects and things that now hinge on measurement of quantities that do relate to people. And that's brought us much more into touch with the need to work with institutional review boards and make sure that our data collection is really up to the standards it needs to be to both do good science and to protect the individuals who are involved and who are giving us the gift of the data that they share with us. So without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Martinez. Thanks.
Thank you, Will. So I guess I better share, right? Okay, so while I'm sharing, yes, oops, I don't want to share that piece yet. Okay. Yes, I shared earlier when we were chatting that I had, oops, I'm not even on the right slide there. There we go. That I kind of wrestled with what I should talk about for this plenary talk, and because I really didn't feel, even though I had certainly a background in physics, math, and engineering, as well as statistics. Kind of where I've been working lately, I didn't feel that what I was doing was necessarily appropriate for something called the Fall Technical Conference. And in kind of reviewing the slides today, I at one point I'm going to talk about how data are foundational to building models and a lot of what we do as scientists and statisticians. And then I thought to myself, well, is that really true if you have, say, models that are based on physics, if you have physics-based models? And then when Will mentioned, physical, data based on physical entities, I guess, would that pertain to what I'm going to talk about today? And I think it really does, but I would like you to think about those these questions as I go through the talk, because hopefully there'll be time. I'll make time at the end so we could have a discussion. And I really think, I do believe that it's not just data about people, but I do think that the data ethics does pertain to really any type of data that we collect, whether it's from a physical sensor or person's demographic information or responses to a survey. Those all are appropriate, and we need to keep in mind data ethics principles as we handle that type of data. So I want to thank you and the organizers for inviting me to give a talk at this conference. I'd like to acknowledge my co-author and friend and colleague, Donna Lalonde, who's she's at the ASA. She's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Outreach, and she's just a fantastic person. And we've had many discussions over the years, the past couple of years, on data ethics. So we're virtual, we're not together. I can't see your smiling faces in the audience. But I do want to hopefully have you participate in this talk. So what I'd like you to do is get your smartphone. I have my smartphone, or you could open up another tab on your browser and go to menti.com and be prepared for some questions that I'm going to ask you. And when you go to menti.com, I'll give you a code. And then what you will do is enter that code, and a little sort of a quiz, I guess, will pop up. So what I'd like you to do is go to menti.com, enter this code. It's 40494625. Now I'm going to do it too. And I want you to put in your location. Where are you located right now? So I'm located in Fredericksburg, which is a long word to spell, Virginia. Okay, great. Oops. All right. So we have people in North Carolina, New York. Wow, Salt Lake City, fantastic. Great, thank you. All right, so when after the talk, I guess my slides will be posted, but there's going to be several chances for you to enter information, respond to these little quizzes. And I will gather the answers, put them in the presentation, and then send it to the organizers for them to post. So you'll be able to see the results of the questions. Now, I have given, as I said, versions of this talk in the past couple years. And I first got interested in, or I guess my eyes were first opened to the issues in the use of data and some of the problems that can arise. Back at it was a conference on statistical practice a couple years ago, and I moderated or chaired a panel session. And some of the stories that I learned about, I'll talk about in just a moment. And once I started learning more about data ethics, I just saw the issues about proper use, the good use of data in lots of different places. So really today, I don't have any equations in my talk. I just want to share stories with you and some of the issues, and just to get us thinking about the ethical use of data. So starting off with some of the stories that I've heard. This one was late in 2019. There was an article published in the Washington Post that I think it was some health insurance companies had paid to have somebody build models that would help predict what patients in the future might encounter, severe health issues, and so that maybe they could target them to say, well, before you have these severe health issues, what preventative measures could we do to maybe prevent those from happening, so we don't have to pay for high medical costs in the future. And they wanted to exclude race, so they did not have that as a variable, but they did have future costs to the healthcare system as one of the variables. And then they built a model and tried to predict who would, what patients would, could take advantage of these preventative measures. Now, the problem is that cost is not race neutral. And they found that minority patients would have fewer costs than white patients for the same medical condition. And some of the reasons for that is because maybe those who are in the minorities, they might not have the medical insurance, or they might distrust doctors or the healthcare system, so maybe they don't seek medical care. So essentially then the models underestimated the health needs of minority patients. And what I found particularly interesting about this is how they found out about this issue or this bias was a researcher took the results and did a sort of a spatial analysis and visualized the data spatially. And they found that those who were high risk were in predominantly white neighborhoods. So the idea that they used visualization and spatial statistics to find this bias in the model was interesting to me. This one is a fairly well-known example, one of the first ones I learned about. Amazon constructed tried to create a model that would take resumes and sort of score them, 1 to 5 stars, and then the highest scored resumes would then be passed on to the hiring officials. And they realized that the ratings were not gender neutral. And the reason for this is because the data that they used to build the models were from the previous 10-year period. And during that 10-year period, a majority of the employees that were hired were males. And what was interesting about this to me was that they tried to sort of remove the bias in the model, and they were, once they found out it was not gender neutral, and they were unable to do so. So they ended up just scrapping it. This example is fairly well known, and it's often used to illustrate problems with algorithms that are sort of a black box, or people can't know what's in the algorithm or in the model because they're trade secrets. And there was an inmate, Glenn Rodriguez. He was arrested at 16, and he was convicted of second-degree murder. I think he was just part of the group, and there was a death, so he wasn't the one who actually directly caused it. But he was incarcerated, and over many years, he was like a model prisoner. He came up for parole, and the prison system used a commercial program, model, algorithm, what have you, that would assess the risk of the person, or the risk that they would reoffend, and he was flagged as being high risk. And he tried to appeal it, but the the company, in the system, they would not let him know what variable caused this evaluation of high risk for him, because it was a trade secret. So he had no way to kind of appeal it. But through conversations with his fellow inmates, he was able to determine that there was one question where it was just a binary, like yes or no, that guards would have to input. And somehow the guard put down that he was high risk. And so that variable had the most weight. And I think if you'd switch that variable, he went from extremely high risk to low risk. Here's another hiring example. Some companies are using commercial software that have algorithms or models where you're interviewing a candidate, and these models will take the facial expressions, how the mouth moves, what words are used, the tone of voice, and then assess the candidate, and then give them an employability score. This is another issue of proprietary tools and trade secret algorithms. But the problem is that as a candidate, I can't go to the machine or to the model and say, what did I do? Why did I get such a low score? What can I do to improve myself so I may be more employable in the future? And one of the interesting things about this is that the company, one of the candidates, complained to the company or something, or appealed, and the makers of the model, they were unable to even say how the algorithm worked, because it was very complicated, based on deep learning and artificial neural nets. So the company itself couldn't even say, how was the method working? What about training data? I'm sure most of us have something like Amazon Alexa, what is it, Google Echo or something, but where you have smart speakers in a device. And there was some articles in late, I think 2019, early 2020, about where Amazon was collecting, they were recording data that through Alexa, and then they were listening to it and tagging it and so forth, and using that to better train the algorithms and train the models. And that to me was pretty shocking, because I thought, why is it listening and recording my data? But I thought, well, of course it has to be listening, because it's waiting for me to say Alexa so it can do something. So that to me is a bit scary. And also, people have cameras maybe in their home. I actually have a camera in my home, or the cameras on the doors. So just think about all that data that's out there, and we don't know necessarily who's using it and for what. Back when I moderated that panel, one of the examples they talked about was driverless cars or autonomous vehicles. And say you're in a situation where you have a driverless car, and here's a little picture on the right, hopefully you could see it, where you have a car going, and the car is either going to hit a group of pedestrians, or the car swerves and it will hit a barrier. So that, assuming the accident's unavoidable, what would you do? What would you program the car to do? Minimize the damage to the car, save the passenger that's in the car, save the pedestrians? What? It might depend on who's doing the decision. Is it the insurance company, for the car itself, or what? Maybe they don't want to damage the car. So it's a tricky question. And in order to sort of better understand the question, MIT developed something called a moral machine. And it's pretty interesting. They had several scenarios that they crafted where someone was going to die, right? There was going to be an unavoidable accident. And they had a mix of situations where, you know, people were, say the pedestrians were young or old, rich or poor, the race of the pedestrians, whether there were pets there. And then they also had, I think, some other you know, demographic characteristics, but they found that for the most part, regardless of age, gender, or country, most people spared humans over pets and groups of people over individuals, which is maybe not too surprising. But what I think is a good takeaway from this is that the ethics, or the morals here, depends on a lot of things, and it depends on our background, our beliefs, our age, gender, so forth, and as well as our country, our location. And so they kind of group the responses into 3 sort of major areas. So this would be the Western group here that showed a preference for inaction. I think that would actually be me. I would probably just, you know, freeze. I wouldn't want to make a decision. And the Eastern, who would spare pedestrian, spare the lawful. And Southern, which would spare females, the fit and young, and those of higher status. So here's where you get to go to Menti again. And let me see if I can make sure this switches. All right. All right, so go here. Let me play this. And it's code 9007-9748. And there's 2 questions. It should go to each. One of is, what would you have a driverless car do? Hit the person or a barrier? So if it's that picture I showed you before, which one would you do? Nobody's answered yet. So let me answer. 9748. All right, I'm gonna hit the barrier. Would you ride in a driverless car? Yes. All right, why is this not, maybe I need to refresh. Okay, there we go. Okay. I don't know how to get to the next slide. So we'll just have to wait until the end to see what people answer. All right, so so those are some stories just to get us thinking, and I'm sure that there's more stories out there. Maybe you know of some of them that you could tell us at the end. But in order to kind of make sure we're talking about similar things, let's talk about what is data ethics. So ethics itself is a branch of philosophy. It's the study of right and wrong. It's the set of moral principles governing our behavior. So it's not laws, it's not regulations, it's not rules. It's, you know, it's kind of abstract. What are those things that guide our behavior? So data ethics itself builds on over 30 years of computer ethics, which then kind of morphed into information ethics and then became recently data ethics. And if you think about it, data are fundamental to what we do. And this is what I was trying to get at in the beginning of this conversation and my discussion with Will, because at this point I was thinking, well, if we have data, say from a sensor, you know, physical sensor, do we need to worry about ethics when we have that type of data? Well, I think we do. And again, let's talk about that at the end. Now, other sort of not definitions, but labels for data ethics could be big data ethics, data science ethics, AI ethics. So you'll see some of that later on in the slides. So back in, I guess 2016, there was a special issue of, I think it's like Transactions of Philosophy or something. And one of the papers in that issue, and it's open access, so you should be able to get to it. But one of the papers in that issue talked about the 3 axes of data ethics. And I really kind of like this view or definition of data ethics. And they said, well, you have to consider the ethics of data itself, like the collection of the data sets. So issues about privacy, protecting people's identities, scraping the web. Just because the data is on the web, does that mean it's okay to grab it? So there's been examples that I've seen where some group has hacked a website, scraped everything off the website, made it public. But because that happened, does that mean it's okay to use the data for some other purpose because it was sort of illegally obtained? So something to think about. The ethics of algorithms, I think this axis pertains to some of the examples that I've talked about already with the building the models and sort of the bias that's inherent in the data. And the ethics of practice. Okay, so just because data is on the web, so one of the problems we have at the Bureau of Labor Statistics where I work is, say we want to collect prices on products because we're responsible for the consumer price index. Well, somebody might say, well, you could just scrape data off the web and get prices for things, say at, I don't know, Best Buy or wherever. But just because it's on the web, do we have informed consent to scrape that data? Probably not. So all these are important. And I think this last one down here, secondary use of the data, we'll talk about that in a little bit more with some of the data ethics principles and frameworks. So in other words, I collect some data for one purpose, somebody else could use it for something that's not a good use of it, I'll put it that way. So this is a, can't right see the top here. This is a definition from, the UK for data ethics. They have a data ethics framework. I'll talk more about that later. They say data ethics is an emerging branch of applied ethics, which describes the value judgments and approaches we make when generating, analyzing, and disseminating data. They talk about the importance of the technology, and I think this is important. And thinking back to Alexa and cameras and things, something that we need to keep in mind. This is from 2016. This person talks about big data ethics, and he mentions the societal impact, and we'll see more of that. But what I liked about what he said is, because somebody might say, well, we have ethical guidelines and ethical practice as scientists and statisticians. Why do we need something on data ethics? But data ethics does differ from just general ethics. So we do need something different, or in addition to that. Data Ethics Ireland community says data ethics is a set of principles and methods through which the ethical, I can't see my my slides are sort of covered with Zoom here. Ethical implications of applications of data processing and analysis. But it's about understanding complicated, hard to predict social phenomena. That's kind of gets at what Will was saying, emerging from complicated and hard to understand technologies. So again, the technology comes into play. And what I really like what they said down here at the bottom, we have to be anticipatory. So what are some of the ways that people could use our data in ways that we don't intend, and for to do bad things or unethical things. I really love this website here. So I'd urge you to go to this link I have. It's called We All Count. And they stress that data ethics is in each step, should be considered in each step of the data product lifecycle, all the way from funding, which I didn't even think about this, but writing a proposal to get funding to do a project, all the way down here to the right, which has to do, it's kind of cut off a bit, but the communication of the results, how do we communicate it and how do we disseminate the results? And they have a really good framework at this link. So, and they go into some depth on all of the steps. All right, so here you get to do the Menti.com again. And should I do how to get to the other second one? All right, I would like you to give us your definition of data ethics. And that is code 6478-1261. So 6478-1261. See how I'm doing on my time. All right. Okay, be sure to enter your definition in there. So now I'm going to talk about what are some of the organizations doing with regard to data ethics. So organizations we'll look at are some of these data ethics communities, our professional associations, and our country. So in terms of legislation. So there's a group called Data for Democracy, and they have a global data ethics project. And they have, 5 principles. And kind of remember some of these principles because one of your the last quiz, I think, or Menti.com quiz has, I'm going to list some principles. So be thinking about which principles you think are important. But Data for Democracy has these 5: fairness, openness, reliability, trust, and social benefit. Data in Society, they also talk about the social impact, especially in our data-centric technology world. And how does that impact us? So again, I think going back to the Alexas and the cameras and so on. I really like this group here. It's called dataethics.eu. And they call themselves a think do tank. So they're not just, thinking great thoughts, but they also provide information about actions that you could take based on those big thoughts. And so they have tools for data ethics. I'm a big one for tools. So I think this is great, but they have their principles of data ethics we'll talk about in a minute. They have data ethics tools for companies, for individuals. And this is interesting given, our virtual world today, that they have, here it is, ethical software for working at home and keeping in touch. So take a look at that. But here's their principles. Who benefits from the data processing? Who has control over the data? Transparency and accountability. We're going to hear those two quite a bit. Are the needs of vulnerable citizens and populations considered with the data? So children, maybe minorities, those with disabilities and so on. And designing sustainable data solutions. So this gets at the future, a little bit of a different consideration of the future. So not looking necessarily at possible unethical uses of the data, but how can we maybe have the right kind of metadata or what have you to have a sustainable data infrastructure, so we don't have to go back and reinvent everything. David Hand, who's a well-known statistician and data scientist, He wrote an article that was in the IMS bulletin, and this is open access too. But he makes some points here that we'll see reflected in other frameworks, that it needs to serve the public good and, of course, adhere to legal requirements. So the United Kingdom has done some good things, I think, in data ethics. They do have a framework I mentioned earlier. Here's their principles and their framework. So we see right at the top, there has to be a clear public benefit, and then also beware of the legislation that we need to adhere to. I like this one here, understand the limitations of the data. And we see the same issue of being transparent and accountable. Oh, one thing I have to say about the, maybe I say it later, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. The UK has a really good framework here. Here's a link to it. The document has a description of the framework, the principles, and then they also have like a workbook or a check sheet that you could use to make sure that when you're doing collecting data or doing an analysis or project, you could make sure that you're within this data ethics framework. This is from the EU. They have issued this guidance. Let's see, it's called the Expert Group on Artificial Intelligence, has issued these guidelines. All right, what about professional associations? So, as Will mentioned, I'm very much involved in the American Statistical Association and other associations. So what are they doing? What do they have with respect to ethical guidelines and so forth? And in particular, data ethics. So the ISI, the International Statistical Institute, they have a declaration on professional ethics. I need to make sure they haven't revised this, but last time I looked, it was more on professional practice or professional guidelines, not nothing really that I saw that was based on data. So I'd really love to see them add something about data ethics. The American Statistical Association has ethical guidelines for statistical practice, and I urge you to read this. I talked about ethics at a CSP. Oh gosh, it was the last time I traveled, which was in February of 2020. And one of the audience members, she said that whenever she goes to a job interview or talks to maybe a customer, she says, I follow the ASA ethical guidelines and shows them to them. So, which I thought was a really good practice. But anyway, there's a lot of these pertain to our professional ethics, not necessarily data, but I do want to point out here the second one, integrity of data and methods. So that does pertain to data ethics. And so here's the information under there. The ethical statistician is candid about any known or suspected limitation, defects or biases in the data that may affect the integrity or reliability of the statistical analysis. And then objective and validation interpretation of the results. Requires that underlying analysis recognizes and acknowledges the degree of reliability and integrity of the data. And I think the ASA, they do revise this periodically, I think every 5 years. And they do have one new one that's a revision that will be coming out soon, I believe. So I haven't really seen the details of it, so we'll see if it goes more into data ethics. The Royal Statistical Society, they've done a lot more in this area, and fairly recently. And they have, in fact, a special interest group on data ethics, which I think is fantastic. They issued something that I love the title of, the Data Manifesto. And this statement on the front is really good. It says data is a driver of prosperity, the revolutionary resource that is transforming the nature of economic activity, the capability that differentiates successful from unsuccessful societies. So it really talks about the importance of data. And they have sort of 10 action items in there. The first 5 have to do more on official statistics. So it's, you know, these actions should be more, you'll be taken by those who work in the area of official statistics. And then the last 5, I would say, are more outward facing in terms of like to the public. So I like this, you know, train up the nation on statistics, involve the public in shaping the conversation about how data are used, misinformation, and more. So take a look at that. IEEE has something called Ethics in Action. Last time I checked, they still just had the first edition up, but I think they've been working on a second edition for at least a couple years now. So maybe it's out already, but that's a good resource for you. Here's some recap or summary of their general principles. The issue of human rights, the connection with society and individuals is important. See, we have again here, transparency, accountability, and guard against all potential misuses and risks, you know, how the data might be used. And I think that's really challenging. What about countries and legislation? Most of us have heard about the GDPR. I know when it first came out, every time I'd use an app or something, I would have to click something saying that I know about the GDPR and I agree to it or what have you in order to use that app. So people might, I think, have heard about it. And other countries have, you know, followed along and passed similar laws and regulations. But essentially, these laws protect our data rights, the right to be informed, the right to object, the right of access. The last 2, I think, are really important, the right for the data to be corrected or fixed and to be forgotten. All of which I think is pretty difficult in these days. This website is pretty interesting. Once you get if you go look at the slides, I would encourage you to go to this site and see if it's been updated. I'm sure it has, but it has information about data protection and privacy legislation around the world. And you can see, you know, which countries don't have any and which countries have some. And so check that out. I found that website through this document, a report from Deloitte, and it has government trends in 2020. And they had a whole chapter on data ethics. So take a look at that. You could get to it at this link. So it's pretty interesting. Now, what about the US? What are we doing with respect to data? Well, it turns out we do have a federal data strategy, which is great. The mission of the federal data strategy is to fully leverage the value of federal data for mission, service, and the public good by guiding the federal government in practicing ethical governance, conscious design, and a learning culture. Now, there was an action plan, which was, I guess, part of there was a federal data strategy action plan. And there were 2 actions that pertain to data ethics in particular. And one is a catalog that you could link to here. And this catalog has kind of provides information for training. So to train the government and maybe more, I guess, other people, not necessarily just the government, but in areas related to data ethics. So how can we train people in this area? But I think what's maybe a little bit more of interest to me here is the framework. So we do also have a framework like the UK has. And I actually gave some, contributed to this framework. And I think they have case studies and so on. So check that out. So it's good that the United States is doing something with data ethics as part of our federal data strategy. Now, the UN also has a data strategy, and I love the title of it too. It's the Data Strategy for Action by Everyone, Everywhere, with Insight, Impact, and Integrity. So I haven't looked too closely at that one, but I will, and I would encourage you to do that, that also. So it's not just the US and the UK, and the European Union, but elsewhere. So take a look. All right, so I think this is the last quiz. Let's see. Oh, good. All right. Oh yeah, okay. So here I would like you to rank the principles. So this is code 5806-6268. And you can rank the principles. Which ones do you think are most important? And then the second question I think has to do with what's one thing you would take away from this talk to maybe share with a colleague. Let's see. I don't know why these don't show up as we go. Nobody's done it yet? All right, I'll just leave it there for a second. Oh, I guess I better wrap up here, which is good. I'm almost there. Yes, okay, I'm just gonna quit here in the next, take me about a minute to talk about some tools. As I said earlier, I really love tools. It helps us address some of these issues, but I think there's a whole lot more that we need to do. This is a data set bias assessment tool that really is more for people who write a survey. So I have a questionnaire for people to answer, and you could put the survey questions in there and get an assessment done. This is the Ethics and Algorithms Toolkit, which I would encourage you to take a look at. It's hard to see, but I love this thing down at the bottom. The question isn't whether you should, but when will you start? The Canadian government has an algorithm impact assessment tool that you could access here. And IBM has some white papers and tools about the bias and ethics and adversarial threats that you could take advantage of. Although this to me was a little bit sort of hard to get through and find, but at least this will maybe get you started. All right, I'm going to end here with this slide. I don't know how many of you have Netflix, but this is a show on Netflix about bias in algorithms that was demonstrated by MIT Media Lab researcher. So this uncovered flaws in facial recognition technology. So with that, I think I will, and let me just say here's my contact information, and I have a bunch of references here at the end. So you could explore issues with data ethics. All right, so I think I'm going to quit sharing.
Okay, thanks for a very wonderful talk. I really enjoyed that, and it prompted many different thoughts in my mind about the points, sort of human data versus physical science data and other areas. So wonderful stuff. I really enjoyed it. So I think we need to focus on this a lot more. We're realizing, I think, these days of things that we've overlooked as a society, a variety of social areas and situations. And I think data ethics is right in there with a lot of the other ones. We've been just recognizing that we're really giving short shrift and we need to do better. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah, it was, okay, so before I got into this, in my PhD work, when I was working on my PhD, I started working on data-driven methods and algorithms. So in other words, and I always thought, wow, if we let the data speak, right, and we just base it on the data, that's going to be objective. I don't have the human, I'm not in there messing and tweaking, right? That, and so I thought the data, we're fine if we do that. And then when I heard these examples about, like, especially the Amazon one, and that was just a huge eye-opener to me. And I thought, wow, was I ever wrong about, the fact that data inherently kind of captures the inherent biases that we have, as like a culture or a society or something. So
yes, we've been feeling very much the same way. We've been doing a lot of work recently in forensic science at NIST, trying to put it on a firmer scientific foundation. And so one of the things I love about your talk is that how you included the effect of models and communication in the definition of data ethics, because in forensic science in particular, we're discovering that that's an area where we feel there's a lack, and others are kind of back and let the data speak, and the model uncertainty is small. The communication is not really part of the statisticians or the scientists' prerogative, and we find ourselves disagreeing with all those. And another part of this, let me throw out one last thing, and then maybe you'll have some thoughts on the question I have too. Another thought that resonated was the proprietary nature. We're seeing a lot of problems with people saying, oh, my proprietary system is fine if I let you test it. And we're not so sure about that. So my question that I have is, do you think there's really any way, given the principles of data ethics, to use proprietary systems in a lot of these applications? So that's a lot now. So sorry.
No, that's this is my personal opinion, but one of the things that's always bothered me is if there's a black box algorithm or model or something, I want to know the innards of it. I want to know what's inside of it, because then you've got everything's kind of based on the inputs that the model builder, the commercial entity or what have you did to create the model. And so I've really never liked that, and maybe it's because I want more control over it or something, that I would rather know what's going on inside of it. And one of the, so I first had heard about like some of this issue with trade secret algorithms from Mary Gray, who's, I think she is an actual attorney, but she's a faculty at American University. But anyway, she was talking about this issue because you've got, like say, Glenn Rodriguez, he can't appeal to an algorithm, right? And so it's as if his accuser, is you have no recourse. And even the candidate, the potential employee, he can't go to this neural network and say, well, how come I got a low employability score? And how can I improve in the future? You have no recourse. So I think that's an issue. And the other really big issue that I wrestle with, and I don't have an answer to it, is that remember I said that Amazon with the hiring and the resumes, they said, well, we could just remove the bias. They tried to do it, they couldn't do it. The example where I had the medical insurance thing, somebody in the article said, well, that's okay if there's a bias, we could always just remove it. And and just my own opinion, that's scary. I mean, I don't agree that you could just remove it. Well, okay, maybe you could remove it, but that's not necessarily going to solve it.
Well, and knowing the bias, yes, you could subtract it off if you knew it, but what is it?
Yeah.
How do you really define it? I mean, if you can define it, you could probably fix it in a more structural way, I would think,
Yeah.
and that's sort of the problem.
Yeah, and I don't even know how to really, and I think this is a research problem too. How do you really find like the bias in your data? I mean, how do you?
Yeah, I think you have to, through external experiences where you use it in contexts that didn't fit the development, they become revealed. But until you do that, you don't see it. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't have the answers to these. I think they're important questions and areas for, research. So.
Yeah. I've got a question in the chat here.
Okay.
So from one of the audience members, Olga Engel, can digital twins technology improve incident tracking and data integrity?
I don't know, because I don't know what digital twins is. Can she unmute herself and?
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea. Please unmute and ask. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe Sarah can help with that.
See, that's why I love these, because I always learn something.
Yeah. Maybe while we're waiting to see if that can be done, I'll mention, I was trying to think about the physical science angle on this, and I realized, we're not a regulatory agency, NIST, but we create standard reference materials that are used by regulatory agencies and industry to make sure they're talking to each other nicely. And so, for example, we have many reference materials for sulfur and fossil fuels. And I was thinking, where is the ethics in that? Because, we're just saying, here's a material, and we're just getting the sulfur content in this material. But I started to think bigger, and I say, well, what if we had two different measurement methods we could use? One that's cheaper, easier, safer for the scientist, but doesn't give as good an answer, or one that is, less convenient to use in some way, but would produce data that might then shed light on something that we won't see otherwise. So I think it is everywhere. I think we just have to change our mindset and start looking. And once we have some examples, that'll be easier to do.
Yes, I think you're right, because that's how, Lisa, I was learning, was like these stories and these examples about, the uses of it and what issues people have encountered, just like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And it seems now, Olga, you should have access to your microphone if you unmute and want to ask or tell us more about digital twins technology. Here's a link. So the use of digital twins in healthcare, socioethical benefits and socioethical risks. And there's a link here to a biomedical journal, it looks like. And then here's another question. What suggestions do you have to teach about these issues, either in school or on the job, to mitigate or prevent some of the issues you've highlighted today?
That is a fantastic question. I think as sometimes courses will have, say, one lecture in like data ethics, but I believe that, I'm hoping that professors would include like a discussion of data ethics throughout the course. And in fact, there's I think it's a UVA in their one of their data science curriculum, that they have data ethics is at each step of the way it's kind of considered. And one of the ways I think that's good to learn is through case studies. And at the end of the slides, I have some examples of case studies and resources and things there. And some of them are pretty interesting. One of them, I hope it's in there, because those were like these were real situations, and they would have like, oh, here was this real situation. These researchers wrestled with the ethical considerations, and this was what their decision was based on, these evaluations. So that was kind of interesting. Yeah, so I think case studies is a really good way to have people think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's always a good way to learn a lot of things. I find one of my primary tools is case studies and examples to get me going, at least. So we maybe have time for one last quick question. We've hit the end of the hour. If anybody's got one, I'll give it a
Well, I have
second.
my homework here on digital twins, so.
And I guess I do have one last thing that came up as you were speaking. What about plagiarism as data ethics?
Wow.
You know, is that data ethics or not? I mean, you talked about sort of taking someone's data and using it for something other than they thought. I would think not giving credit would be one of these aspects too, but maybe that's even bigger. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I mean, plagiarism is a huge issue, very, very important. And that's, I think, important with respect to our professional behavior, right? So I think that goes like way beyond data ethics itself. But it's kind of interesting to think about that in particular with data ethics. Yeah, because you could think about that, all right, I collected some data for this purpose, and this is what I'm using it for. But then if somebody takes that and then uses it in some other manner that's unethical, yeah, then that is, I guess, like plagiarism, right?
Well,
Or
certainly
theft.
if they didn't give credit, yeah, if they didn't give credit for sure. So
Yeah.
yeah.
But and one thing though, I think it's really, really hard, if not impossible, to think about all the ways somebody could use your data unethically, right? Or for bad purposes. It's just,
Yep.
yeah. I mean, that's not to say we shouldn't do it, but it's difficult.
It is a big challenge, but I think, the first step in addressing it is bringing it to light and making it aware and, turning us on to the fact that we might be doing things that if we thought about it, we would not be proud of, or might not support. Yeah. So
Yeah. Or like in that AI ethics toolkit, it said, it's not whether you should or not, but when are you going to start? So we at least need to ask those questions and, and try to tackle them.
now we've got a couple more questions, but we're at the end of our hour. I don't know what we ought to do. Are you willing to stay on and answer a couple more, or is
Sure,
that
yeah.
going to cut into the next thing on your list of items to do today? So
No, this was my last official thing for the day. So
okay. Unless Sarah or Mickey then indicates to me that we can't go on, I'll ask you these last two as well, and maybe we'll get one or two more. Is it ethical to use census data for gerrymandering? This is a question from John Lewis.
I'll have to pass on that question. Mostly because I work for the federal government. Yeah, I'll have to pass on that question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I guess depending on how you word it, there would be different
Yes.
ways to answer, but the way it is, maybe it's a little hard to do it. And then
Yeah.
a last comment, really more than question. Fascinating topic. Thank you for sharing your expertise, Wendy. And I agree. Let's thank Dr. Martinez for this wonderful talk. And I wish we could clap. This is one of the biggest weaknesses of these systems, I think, that
Yeah.
you can't see the audience clap and you can't see the audience reactions. But thank you very much.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and I know everybody's patience with sort of COVID and rescheduling and all that, but this was thanks for making this happen. So thank you.
And thanks to all of those who are really organizing the FTC and driving this. So that's a key. So Sarah Burke and Mickey Maciendo both, and others behind the scenes. So thanks. And I think that brings us to a conclusion.
All right, great.
Thanks,
everybody.
Yeah.